Okay, I'm calling to order the Tuesday, March 7th, 2023 regular monthly meeting of the Salt Lake City Human Rights Commission. Let's take roll rather quickly. Make a note that Commissioner Jaramillo and Commissioner Lita both indicated they would not be able to attend. So I am Jason Wessel representing District 1 and Chair. We get introductions from the people online. Let's go with Esther.
Esther Stoll, representing District 2.
Okay, and who else do we have online right now?
We have Shauna and Everett.
Okay, and then Commissioner Dumbia.
And Shauna Dumbia representing District 7.
And Commissioner Bacon.
Hi, this is Everett Bacon representing at-large commission.
Do we have anybody else online?
We have Mia. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Mia, everyone. I'm an intern for Michelle, working as equity and special projects intern. I attend the University of Utah. I'm a sophomore. I'm currently majoring in business.
Thank you for joining us. And then let's go around the table with introductions.
Michelle Mooney, Equity Manager, Salt Lake City Mayor's Office.
I am Jay Jacobson, representing the Jewish Federation's Partners Against Hate.
Asher Ireland, intern for Jay Jacobson with the Community Partners Against Hate and the Anti-Semitism Task Force of the Niger Federation of Utah.
Maria Romero, Executive Assistant to the Chief Equity Officer.
Okay, and that is everybody present. So I believe that we do have a quorum with the 4 commissioners who are present. So I will entertain a motion that we adopt the minutes as presented by acclamation. Can somebody give me that motion, please, online?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Esther, second.
All right, with that motion being made to adopt the minutes and seconded, I will say without objection 3 times. If there's no objection, then I'll rule that it is adopted. So without objection, without objection, without objection. Seeing no objection, the motion has been adopted, and we have adopted the minutes from February 2023. Next item on the agenda, we have public comment. We don't have any members of the public in the room, and I don't believe we have any members online. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we will skip over public comment, and we will go straight to our presentation on hate crimes. So, Dr. Jay Jacobson, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chairman and members of the Commission. It's a privilege to be here. And as the Human Rights Commission, I think I'd just begin by reminding us of the end of the Pledge of Allegiance, in which we think of this as one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. So as the Human Rights Commission, what I'll be talking about this evening, hate crimes, I think you would agree are actually a threat to both our liberty, and if they're unreported and unresponded to, they're a threat to justice for all of us in our nation. So the title I've chosen is that hate crimes are rising and changing, and I hope to make clear exactly what we mean by those 2 things. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm here tonight representing a group composed of leaders of most of the targeted minorities that have been victimized in hate crimes. And fortunately, a number of elected and appointed officials from city, county, and state government who are really committed to make a Utah a positive example of a community and a state where hate crimes are simply not tolerated. I'm going to ask Michelle to help me as my colleague tonight and go to the next slide. So I have 4 objectives for the commission for this evening. The first is that you'll be aware of, as I said, the rising rate, but also the targets, the types, and the locations where hate crimes occur. Secondly, I'd like you to hear what this group called the Partners Against Hate have done, what we're doing, and I hope you'll join us in what we aspire to do in the near future. Third is to hear from you what your commission has thought about and perhaps what you've already done about this problem. And finally, to find ways for us to work together with law enforcement, schools, and government so that we can increase the reporting of hate crimes, make more sophisticated and helpful our response to hate crimes, and ultimately to prevent them. Next slide, Michelle, please. Sadly, at this time in our history, hate crimes in the United States are at a decade high. So I'm sharing their data, last reported in 2020. But if you look back to 2010, you can appreciate that annually at that time, there were about 6,000 hate crimes. Now they're approaching 8,000. Something that we haven't seen for the last 10 years. The other thing that's on this slide is a definition of a hate crime. And put simply, a hate crime first must be a crime. It must be an action or speech that violates a statute. But the difference is that it has to be motivated by being an offense against a person or property that's motivated by the offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. So I hope you can appreciate that a hate crime is a crime. Simply being biased or discriminating, unless it violates a statute, is not a crime per se. But assaulting someone, threatening them, injuring them, because of a bias against one of these categories constitutes a hate crime, and that puts the crime in a category where the punishment or sentence can actually be increased, and it is because that motivation is a threat against an entire community. If you think about even a violent crime like assault, is usually a crime that affects one person and conceivably their family. But a crime against an individual motivated by bias against their race or gender or disability makes everyone who shares those characteristics frightened and worried about their safety and, of course, their liberty. Next slide. Noted on that previous slide, but I'll call it to your attention, is the fact that while we're seeing almost 8,000 hate crimes a year, they have been historically and currently seriously underreported. The FBI has been changing the system for hate crimes reporting, and not all jurisdictions have incorporated that yet in their reports. Most disturbingly, the 2 largest cities in the United States, New York and Los Angeles, have reported no hate crimes to the FBI in 2021. And just to show you what a difference that can make in statistics, I've mentioned there are about 8,000, but if you notice in light green on this slide, there are almost more than 1,000, about 1,100 hate crimes in 2021, just in New York and Los Angeles. So you can appreciate that the total would go from approximately 8,000 to 9,000 if just those 2 cities were included. Hate crimes in the cities on this graph really demonstrably increased just in the last year. And New York is an excellent example, with the number of hate crimes rising from under 300 to almost 550, and in Los Angeles from about 375 to over 600. So the sort of take-home message is that hate crimes are increasing. They're increasing especially in large cities, and the numbers reported don't fully reflect the number of hate crimes that are occurring. Next slide, Michelle. So there's a huge gap between what we know about reported crimes reported to the FBI and what we learn when we ask people in their households. Annually, the Census Bureau does a household survey asking about whether residents of that household have been victimized in a hate crime. When we average the number of reports to that census survey, instead of about 7,500 crimes a year, we actually learn that people, when asked, report over 200,000. So an easy way for you to think about that gap is that for every single hate crime that's reported, there are approximately 30 that have occurred and not been reported. So as I talk to you about hate crimes tonight, including in Utah, I want you to be thinking about that if I tell you there's been one, you should imagine that there have been at least 30 in that jurisdiction. Next slide. I mentioned in the beginning, you would become aware of the different kinds of hate crimes. And in this graphic, you can see that the majority of hate crimes, almost 65% or 2/3, are motivated by a bias against race, ethnicity, or ancestry. So if, for example, you're in a minority community, which can be distinguished by something that you wear or the color of your skin, that's what this blue part of the graph represents. And in recent years, we've seen that, for example, people of Asian ancestry have come under particular increasing attack in hate crimes. And historically in our country, African Americans have been the targets based on race and ethnicity. Sexual orientation is an increasing part of the targets in hate crimes at about 16%, and religion very close to that. In recent years, in terms of sexual orientation, particularly gay males and transgender individuals have been singled out as targets. And within religion, Judaism has historically been the most common target, but in response to international events, there have now been increasing responses on people of the Islamic faith as well. Next slide. This is just another representation of the way hate crimes are distributed in terms of what the bias is. And I think you can see in this slide graphically, as we did in the other graphic, that race and ethnicity continue to predominate. And so the reported numbers of those are almost 5,000 of the reported hate crimes each year. Religion and sexual orientation next, but as you can see, each year there are people who are singled out for violence or threats because of their gender identity, disability, or their gender itself. Next slide. I mentioned in the very beginning that we would be talking about hate crimes in terms of rising hate crimes. And in this slide, you can see easily that just in the last 2 years, hate crimes in general have risen by almost 40%. I mentioned earlier that anti-Asian hate crimes are somewhat new, or at least something we haven't seen for over 50 years in this country, but their increase is really striking. Over 200% increase in a single year of crimes against people of Asian origin. An almost 60% increase was recorded in crimes against Jews, where religion was the motivation, and a 50% increase in crimes targeting anti-gays. I mentioned particularly anti-gay males. Just because it's not on the slide doesn't mean that there has not been an increase in other targets. And so the rate of crimes against Hispanic individuals, Latinx individuals has also been increasing. Next slide. And I think to bring this a little closer to home now, we've been talking about the country as a whole. On this graphic of a map of the United States, the states shown in red were reporting a record increase in their number of hate crimes in the year 2021. So let me emphasize that. On the first slide, I showed you US crimes reaching a decade high. Shown in red on this map are states that have never seen this number of hate crimes before. And sadly, Utah is one of the states that is in that category. Very important to remember that sometimes we see record numbers because there's actually been an improvement in reporting. That could actually be, if that were the case, a very positive sign that government and law enforcement was beginning to respond to these. In Utah, and we'll look at that in more detail, we know that more hate crimes have been charged, but it's an open question as to whether or not that's because of an increase in reporting or a real increase in violence against individuals motivated by bias. I also want you to pay close attention to two states that neighbor each other, Oregon and Washington. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. Both of those states have been seeing hate crimes increase in recent years, but Oregon established a remarkable program to make it easier to report hate and bias incidents. And I think it's conceivable that the improvement that they're seeing is actually a function of a better reporting system, which is now working. Next slide. The last couple slides I'll mention to help you understand hate crimes are by category and by location. So of the approximate, I've mentioned that there are crimes that that are charged about 8,000 times, but many of them affect more than one individual. So there are almost 9,000 hate crime offenses, 2/3 of which are considered crimes against persons. About 1/3 are crimes against property, things like vandalism or arson, and a small percent are considered crimes against society because they also involve breaking rules of society, for example, rules about scheduled drugs. Next slide. The last one that I will show you that details something about hate crimes and understanding them is by location. And most of them, about 1/3, occur, that is the largest group, occur in or near residences or people's homes. About 1/6 occurred on highways, roads, or on public streets or sidewalks, and a little less than 10% at schools or colleges. Similar percent occurred in parking lots or in garages, and a small fraction in restaurants and in parks and playgrounds. Next slide. Now I'd like to focus a little more closely on Utah. And as you can see, during the period 1998 to 2022, hate crimes were fairly steady with some fluctuation in the range of about 60 to 75. In the last 3 years, they've begun to increase significantly. And as you saw on the map of the country, Utah has now reported a record number of hate crimes in the state. The distribution is similar to that which is seen nationally, with the largest group being hate crimes targeting race or ethnicity, and then two very commonly chosen targets would be religion or sexual or gender orientation. Disability is also a recognized target for hate crimes, and as you can see, that continues to occur in Utah, but has only been included in the reported data since about 2009. Next slide. If you look at a map of Utah, and you heard me mention earlier that hate crimes have increased primarily in large cities, you can appreciate that much of the hate crime in Utah is concentrated along the Wasatch Front, with many of those crimes in Salt Lake County, in Davis County, Summit County, and Utah County. So they cluster in that area. And again, on the right-hand side, you can appreciate that they follow largely the national distribution, with most of them occurring at homes, a significant number at schools and universities in our state, and I think really importantly, an equal number occurring at places of worship. Finally, about 20 of the total were occurred at parks and playgrounds. The other focus that I think you can see is in Washington County or St. George. Next slide, Michelle. I'll transition now to the other thing that I said was an objective, which is that you should learn, or hope you will learn, about what this group of Partners Against Hate has been doing. Partly because of what we saw in Europe, we formed an anti-Semitism task force in 2017. And unfortunately, in 2018, our worst fears were realized when there was an attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 Jews at worship services on their Sabbath. In our community, we plan vigils at the synagogues in Utah, which are located in Salt Lake County and in Summit County. And they were well attended by leaders of other faith communities and our elected individuals. It was a sense of strong support for what was obviously a heinous hate crime. In 2019, we decided to include those people who had shown support as people who shared, I think, an equal commitment to respond and begin to eliminate hate crimes in our communities. And we called that group Community Partners Against Hate. The Utah legislature, partly in reaction to a horrific attack on a young Mexican man in Salt Lake City, was reconsidering passing a meaningful hate crimes bill. With the help of our partners, the county attorney, many people in law enforcement, we were finally successful in having Utah join the other 45 states in the United States that do have meaningful hate crimes bills. In that same year, we brought an education director from the organization called the Anti-Defamation League to our community to meet with students, with the school superintendent of the Salt Lake District, and with school principals to begin to explore implementing a program called No Place for Hate in our schools. Next slide, Michelle. In 2020, we actually met as a partnership with our mayor, who I think was extremely supportive to the efforts that we were making and agreed to assist us with her staff and the staff of the Salt Lake City Library to put together a webinar on hate crimes with leaders from the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Hispanic Media Coalition, and the Western States Center, which focuses on hate and bias incidents, particularly in the West, but in the United States. That program was viewed by about 300 people when it was broadcast, and the video has been seen now almost 3,000 times. In 2021, our partnership responded to hate crimes that were targeting the Chabad synagogue in Salt Lake and the rising incidence of violence against Asian Americans. And we tried to draw attention to that through letters to the editor and appearances on local radio and television media. Next slide. In 2022, the Utah legislature responded to a very angry and misguided email by a former CEO of a Utah software corporation, which was virulently anti-Semitic and full of totally untrue and bizarre charges. The partnership and our Federation task force supported Representative Owens who was able to introduce and then pass a concurrent resolution against anti-Semitism. The governor and his staff have invited our community to come and talk about anti-Semitism in Utah. And then we chose to invite elected leaders and minority leaders to the second Eradicate Hate Global Summit in Pittsburgh. And we brought people from county government responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion, people from the district attorney's office in Davis County, and leaders of the African American community, Islamic community, and the Jewish community. And all of us, I think, left there both much better informed about what was happening in the country and what we could do about it. And we were motivated to really increase the level of activity that we were pursuing in Utah. As a result of that, we met with Representative Owens and several other legislators to talk about possible anti-hate bills for this last session of the Utah legislature. And Representative Owens did introduce a bill to limit the use of automatic weapons or long rifles by 18-year-olds in Utah. Unfortunately, that did not pass, but he also began work on a bill that would enhance our system of reporting. And we're all hopeful that that might be introduced in the next session of the legislature. For this year, even though it's still early in the year, we have successfully worked with one of our partners who was very concerned about traditional religious clothing, particularly for Islamic students when they were participating in competitive sports in high school. And the legislature did pass a bill that grants those individuals and others the freedom to wear religiously prescribed garments when they're competing in high school athletics. Our partners meet monthly, and we've secured a number of superb videos that document how other communities respond to hate when it occurs in their community. And we're currently collaborating with our mayor's staff on producing a new and updated guide to help individuals react to hate incidents, report them, and successfully manage the investigations and prosecutions that follow. And we just had our first of a series of meetings that Chief Brown proposed, which would be the opportunity for him to represent how concerned the police department is with learning about the hate crimes that occur, because as he says, the ones that are unreported are ones that we can do nothing about. So I think with that, let me just summarize ways that we might be able to work together and what we might have accomplished this evening. Next slide, Michelle. I think you can appreciate that increasing reporting is critically important. And you may also recognize that the reasons that people choose not to report hate incidents is often because they haven't the confidence that the police department will A, take them seriously, and B, actually not mistreat them as a consequence of their reports. So building trust with the police department and its city is incredibly important. One of the ways of doing that is reaching out to the community through graphic materials, public service announcements, and especially something like the in-person meetings that Chief Brown has proposed and is now starting to do. We're working hard to update our last guide to how to report and respond and prevent hate crimes. And we think the city is very interested in partnering with us to help distribute those guides to schools and to targeted communities. We would love to see student engagement programs begin in schools, which I think are probably the best way that any experts think of to prevent people from becoming almost intoxicated by the hateful material that they see on social media and then begin to hear amplified by the groups they associate with. And then finally, I think that together, there's no question that we could make Salt Lake City recognized in our state and in our country as a city that has no tolerance for hateful incidents and is no place for hate. Last slide. So I hope that this has helped you to better understand hate crimes. I'm convinced that you're more aware of what these partners against hate are doing. I'd like to hear something about what the commission has been thinking about or doing. And I hope that we've identified ways to work together with law enforcement, schools, and government to increase the reports and the response to, and ultimately the prevention of hate crimes. Thank you all for your attention. Yeah, Michelle just asked me if she would show you a video that we shared with the mayor's staff, which is something that the state of Oregon is doing to promote that program that I mentioned to you earlier, which is a statewide effort. And I think the video will speak for itself in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. Just so you know, it's 56 seconds long.
Does anybody online have any questions they would like to ask? Not seeing any.
Was the video played?
Yes,
Oh, they couldn't hear it.
sorry. We'll get a link to you so you can, so everybody can see it on their own. There was a difficulty with the way the microphones are set up versus the video screen. So
Okay,
yes,
no
the
worries.
video is played. But it's about a minute long PSA, so yeah, we'll make sure that the link gets sent out.
Okay.
Okay, so
This is Everett.
got a
This
question.
is Everett.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I very much appreciate the presentation, and you know, as a disabled individual, I definitely understand that you know these crimes exist, affecting so many individuals of so many backgrounds, and so you know, I'm definitely hopeful that there is something we can do to help in this situation, and definitely support your efforts.
Mr. Chair, I was hoping either you or the commissioners might be able to comment on whether or not the commission has actually kind of considered this problem in some of its deliberations in the past. And if so, what, if anything, they've thought about doing, and if they haven't considered it, whether they would see it as within their general purview and area of responsibility.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. Several years ago, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, we were actually involved in, I believe we wrote a resolution and a letter of support to the Orlando equivalent organization of ours, and we're actually involved with the mayor's office at the time on crafting some language that she had presented against specifically LGBT targeted hate crimes. In the years since then, I think it's been on the back burner because we had a few other priorities that we were focusing on, but this is definitely something that we would be involved with. I believe that there's a very friendly administration on moving forward with this, partnering with, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe Mayor Mendenhall and Chief Brown will both be very receptive to moving forward with something. We just have to coordinate on what and who the joint organization would be. It's something to come out of the mayor's office or the Human Rights Commission or jointly. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank
I get a
you
few
very
more
much.
points in there, I didn't. But I believe that the anti-LGBT hate crimes were what we looked at, were involved most with, because most of the statistics that were being tracked in Utah over the last few years had that as being one of the major targets. We have seen, as you pointed out in the presentation, anti-Semitism has reared its head again. Are there any questions online? Okay, not seeing any. So I've got something that might be a little bit specific to this last legislative session. We've seen coming out of, well, basically Florida, but several other governor's offices are moving forward with a agenda that's very much against diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically targeting the language. We saw an inkling of that in our legislature that didn't move forward this session, I think because it was brought up near the end of the session. But I suspect that either in interim or next year, we're going to see a resurgence of that again, especially in an election cycle going into 2024. So how can organizations like yours and our commission work to support and emphasize the importance of things like diversity, equity, and inclusion in various government bodies, nonprofits, et cetera? Does that make sense, or because I just confused myself?
No, if I could comment, I think that your commission, and in fact, the mayor's office has been very active, I think, in forging relationships with minority communities who have, in many ways, the most to gain as communities with initiatives that could be under the umbrella of a concept like DEI. There's no doubt that it's the entire community that always benefits when those communities are accorded the respect, tolerance, inclusion that they merit. I think that in Utah, we were remarkably successful in passing legislation which had languished for almost 14 years because there seemed to be resistance to a hate crimes law, partly predicated, I believe, because of the idea that a community like gay individuals would be recognized as a significant minority and targeted group. So it was apprehension about that I think resisted that. I think that one of the catalytic events that happened was the vicious attack I mentioned on a young Mexican man by someone wielding a club, basically saying, "I'm here to kill a Mexican." I think that was so upsetting to the great majority of our state, including all religious leaders and even legislators, that the time was right. The terrible attack in Pittsburgh and then that attack in Salt Lake City, I think made people see the greater value of acknowledging the importance of hate crimes that would overcome, I think, any reservations they had. I think these actions against DEI are somewhat analogous. I think they're driven by fear that they will acknowledge and recognize as significant more communities that are different than what is thought to be majority in a particular area. And I think the success we had with the hate crimes legislation might be repeated. There are very committed people represented on our partnership, and I think you know many others. You also know that the state legislature is not by itself particularly diverse. That is, representation of each of the groups that I've talked about tonight is really almost minimal in our Utah legislature. On the other hand, they were very, very attentive and engaged when people from those communities made the effort to go to the Capitol, talk to them in committees and in general session. So I think that if they could hear from all of the rational people who find merit in having our communities better led and our students better educated, we could be helpful, at least in forestalling, I think, an attack on what I see as really positive initiatives in our largest cities. That is here in Salt Lake City and in Salt Lake County. I think we're beginning to have in place significant programs that advance equity. I hope we can maintain that and advance it.
Thank you. Is there anybody online with a question? I don't want to be monopolizing all the time.
Esther here. I just want to say thank you for the presentation and for being willing to come out, and enlighten us on this subject. It's a lot of work and it's definitely one that is appreciated. So thank you and your team for showing up today and being here for us.
This is Everett. I was wondering, do we remember after that horrible incident that happened to the Mexican individual in our community, what became of that? Was the individual, was he criminally prosecuted, diagnosed with a mental illness of some sort? I don't remember and recall what the outcomes of that case that came after that.
I'm sorry, my information not complete, but I could tell you a couple of things about that. I mentioned the timing, and so the timing was very important. That was a case that the Salt Lake County attorney, who normally would be the one to prosecute a hate crime, could not prosecute as a hate crime because we did not have the statute in place in Utah. So that could have been charged as a federal hate crime. It was charged as an assault here in Salt Lake County. There was a trial and there was a conviction as far as I can remember. So I think things to think about going forward are that in some ways, I think that was fortunate for the Hispanic community that such an egregious crime could be properly labeled and some support shown to that community by categorizing it as such. That wasn't available to the county attorney then, but it is now. And our county attorney, I think, is likely to be very vigilant about hate crimes of that type targeting any minority. And I think we're fortunate to have that now as part of the toolkit that the district attorney has available to them. So I think that one of the things I would share with you and that our partnership is very interested in is there's an organization called Not in Our Town. What they have done is produce a number of videos, many shown on PBS, that characterize how entire villages or cities have responded to hateful incidents like the one that you referred to. I think one of the things that we haven't done in Salt Lake City is use that as a fulcrum or a teaching point to begin to change things in our community. Remember what we said at the beginning, for any hate incident or crime, you should assume that there are at least 30 that we don't know about. And that's a particularly compelling example. And I think we're fortunate that the chief is getting ready to meet with each minority community. There's no doubt in my mind that when he meets with the Hispanic community, he will learn about many, many other incidents that haven't risen to that level of press coverage that absolutely deserve response and reaction. So I think that's actually something for us to look forward to. And frankly, for any of our communities to view these films, which we've secured, and discuss them. They're excellent models for how small and large cities in the United States have mobilized to prevent these horrific incidents. I would just mention that your chairman alluded to the shooting in Orlando. There's of course another one in Colorado Springs, also targeting that community. But all of you would appreciate, as I mentioned these names, the horrific things that happened there. El Paso, Charleston, Buffalo, Pittsburgh. All of those cities in a way are now linked inextricably with crimes of hatred. I think that one of our goals, and I hope it will be yours and our city and our state, is to not have Salt Lake City or Utah become one of these cities that is almost iconic for hate crimes. I much rather would see those reported, investigated, and prevented.
Agreed. I think we're all on the same page with that statement. I have a question. This might be more Utah oriented than Salt Lake City, but I've noticed through some other partnerships and work we've done that seems immigrants and the Native American population are very vulnerable, especially in rural Utah. Is there tracking going on for crimes directed towards those communities?
So both of those communities, if the crime is a hate crime, it would look like this. Whether a person who is Hispanic is an immigrant or not, if a crime is committed and it's predicated on the fact that they either are or appear to be Hispanic, that would be considered a hate crime. In some communities, many of the residents who are in that group have been recent arrivals and may be undocumented individuals. If they're targeted because of race or ethnicity, as we indicated, and injured or threatened, those would be considered hate crimes. The only way to know about those is if they come to the attention of law enforcement. That particular community is terrified of drawing the attention of the law enforcement community. That can and has been addressed. There was a killing in Patchogue, Long Island, of a Hispanic individual from Ecuador who had been working and living in the country for 9 years. It was a group of teenagers who habitually went from one community to another, targeting Hispanic-looking individuals for crimes of violence and intimidation. That community and its mayor actually launched a number of programs that I won't detail, but they were addressed directly to the idea of crimes against immigrants and also Hispanics, but in general, people of other national origins. And that community, I think, has been remarkable in the way they've created dialogue between their residents and these new and more recent arrivals. So I think there are opportunities in Utah to bring, that's certainly happening. There's no question that you're correct. But if it's unreported, we can't begin to respond to it. And I think we're really lucky. I think we have law enforcement and city officials who want to know about those crimes and begin to deal with them, and they can be dealt with. I think that's the most important thing that I can say, is that so much of that is about misunderstanding, lack of information, lack of acquaintanceship with different people, and all of those measures can ameliorate those crimes. So I think that we have in one jurisdiction, Salt Lake City, law enforcement that wants to hear more about it, and as I've already mentioned, is going to those communities to declare their preparedness and willingness to deal with that. I can't speak yet to the question of the rural communities and counties that you mentioned, but I mentioned earlier that Representative Owens is going to be introducing a bill about enhanced reporting for the Utah legislature through the Department of Public Safety. They will have to do a great deal of work to make reporting more accessible for our citizens.
And it made mention of Native American populations. Specifically, I would say the Navajo Nation or Bureau of Indian Affairs. Do they track hate crimes differently, or does that get folded in with what's going on now with the FBI?
So the Bureau of Indian Affairs is not going to report hate crime data. The hate crime data is reported by the FBI and the Utah Department of Public Safety. They do both record a bias against Native Americans. It's generally significantly smaller than hate crimes committed against the Hispanic community or any of the other communities that we've mentioned. But if we go back to the map that Dr. Jacobson showed earlier, you can see areas in the Vernal area and in southern Utah that are areas where some of those hate crimes are against the Navajo Nation or the Nation or different tribe groups.
Thank you. I was just wondering how that data was collected. So it's more academic interest than Salt Lake City related. Thank you for sharing that. All right, is there anybody online that has something? Not seeing anything. So Dr. Jacobson, you had a proposal, something that you would like us to consider a partnership with, is that correct?
Well, first, thank you so much for asking, and let me thank again the people that were in attendance at the meeting. I think that you have to do what seems best within your own mission. If this is an initiative that you can support at the level of the city and its police department, I think some communication, if there is consensus with the group on the call and perhaps others, a signal that you see this as having merit and worthwhile would be extremely valuable. And I think the other thing is that you're an especially interesting and committed group of individuals. I would just say that our partnership is always open to people who advocate for communities to which they belong. So we would be more than happy, I think, to begin to include you in some of the work that we do. But I think a message of support for increased reporting and particularly public awareness would really be very helpful. We're in the process of updating the brochure or booklet that I mentioned. And if you see that as having merit, I think letting the mayor's office know would really be useful. I would just tell you that we think that it will be especially useful in the hands of young people in our high schools and middle schools. It's incredible, and I really didn't allude to that, how much abuse and hatred many of them experience online and in their schools, the majority of which never achieves public attention. So I think for them, having a booklet that tells them what constitutes a hate crime and where they can report it would be extremely valuable.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure I for one would definitely be interested in receiving more information and ways to get more involved. As the Human Rights Commission, I think we would have to discuss what our role could be. I think you're already partnering with the mayor's office and the chief of police. They probably have far more pull than we do, so it's more figuring out where we would fit in best.
And we can talk more about that over time too.
Yes. Michelle said we can talk about that more over time since she's not near a microphone. Okay, is there any last thoughts from people online? Not seeing any. Do you have any concluding remarks you would like to make?
Again, only to say thank you. You've been most gracious. I really, really appreciate your participating in your questions. And I think I could also see this as maybe the beginning of an effort that we're both working on. If we can be of any further assistance, for example, in the issues related to resistance to DEI, we would be glad to be helpful there, and hope that we can share with you some of the progress that we're making. We'll be inviting our partners in the mayor's office and in the to go with us again to this Eradicate Hate Global Summit. Our state is at this point, I think, unique in having this very active coalition of minority groups and officials that are working together against hate crimes. So I try to keep you posted on that, and I'm hoping that we'll be bringing people from the mayor's office with us next time. So once again, thank you all for your attention and support.
Thank you for your presentation and your work in this space.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jacobson. Unless anybody has anything else they wish to say online, we will move on to our subcommittee updates. Michelle, you have anything for the CDOT task force?
So subcommittees start next week for the ones we have assigned, so we can table it unless someone has something to discuss.
Okay, I don't have anything to bring up. Let's go down the list. So CDOT, that's the task force that's getting up and running. Homelessness, that's Commissioner Lita, he is not present. Gentrification, we put on hold. Refugees and New Americans, Commissioner Dumbia, do you have anything you wish to update?
So those subcommittees are starting next week.
Just in case there might be something to be aware of. Do you want us to know anything in advance of the subcommittee meeting next week? I guess I should ask. Yes, none. So Commissioner Stoll, do you have anything on children and young advocacy you want us to come to the meeting with next week?
Hello there. I don't have anything to add, but I am excited that we do have a team and a group of wonderful people ready to get working on this particular subject. So that's exciting. But nothing helpful right now to add. Just looking forward to meeting next week and get going.
All right, thank you. We're moving through the agenda really quickly. So that brings us to the last item, discussion or dialogue about human rights around the world. And guess I can kick things off. Situation in Israel is escalating, like I talked about last month. A friend of mine in the Israeli left, though, has said that they have never seen protests as large as what's happening in the streets right now. So I know it's at a tipping point. We'll see where Israel goes. Tunisia has some major issues going on with anti-Black sub-Saharan refugees being not discriminated against, actually, violence being directed towards them. They're fleeing conflict zones and getting into Tunisia, and so the president in Tunisia called them out, said they're trying to change Tunisian society and culture, so some mobs have started attacking people with darker skin. It's really kind of horrifying. Then I guess as a more positive note, Judy Heumann recently passed away. She was a huge disability rights advocate through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you've seen the documentary Crip Camp on Netflix, it's focused on some organizations she was involved with. Just give a highlight they occupied the federal building in San Francisco in the 70s to protest that the disabled were being carved out and excluded from the Civil Rights Act. So partnership between some disability advocates, activists, the Black Panthers, and the LGBTQ community of San Francisco worked together to basically shut down the federal building in San Francisco for 4 weeks. Anyway, it's a great documentary from the Secret Camp, and her memoir was very inspiring for anybody who's involved in civil and human rights activism. So leave it at that.
Jason?
Yes.
Just to add to that, we here in Utah, we actually premiered Crip Camp at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020, right before the pandemic started. I was at the premiere. Judy was at the premiere. It was a marvelous documentary film that was and a premiere that was so well received by the entire Sundance Film Festival community, and then of course went on to be premiered to Netflix. And I believe it was also even nominated for an Academy Award in the documentary film category. It's really something. And Judy was such a force for not only the Americans with Disabilities Act, but 504, the Rehabilitation Act. I could go on and on and on what things Judy was able to do on a U.S. level as well as a worldwide scale with regards to people with disabilities. Her memorial service is tomorrow, I believe, and I believe it is online, and I believe you can find a link to the memorial service at her website, judyhuman.com.
Thank you, Everett.
Sure.
Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up?
I wanted to bring up one other thing, again, related to people with disabilities. There was a bill introduced in the House and in the Senate on transition to competitive and meaningful employment for people with disabilities. I don't know if many of you are aware, but there is still a large practice here in the United States to pay people with disabilities sub-minimum wages. It is through Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And it is something that some states have been able to abolish, but we would like to see it done on a federal level. There was actually a bill introduced here in the Utah legislature to try and ban sub-minimum wages here in the Utah. It did not make it out of committee, but we're hoping it will be run again next year. But we would love to see support for this transition to competitive and meaningful employment, so we can end the practice of sub-minimum wages for people with disabilities.
Thank you again, Everett.
Sure.
Anything from Commissioner Dubia or Stoll?
Nothing from Stoll.
Okay, and I think Commissioner Dubia might have dropped off. I haven't heard from her in a while, but if nobody has anything else, then entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Bacon has moved. Is there a second?
Stoll second.
Stoll second. Okay, without objection. Without objection, seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for hosting and chairing the meeting today.
Thank you, Jason. Commissioner Wessel. Have a good one, you guys.
Jason's fine.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Everett is just fine. All right, good night, all.